And how has your nap schedule been going? I'm sure you're clocking the.
Well, Betsy was back, so I got to sleep through the entire night for the first time in a week last night.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
That was exciting.
Okay, here we go. Action items. I assume no news on the front of finding a video concierge candidate for EWC, Bob, right?
Nobody's asking these days.
Understood. We'll just leave it on there. We'll come across somebody eventually.
Yep.
Continue reaching out to shipping carriers. Any news there?
I've not done anything, Jeremy.
No worries.
I got to figure out. DHL is the only one left, right? FedEx gave us some boilerplate.
Yeah.
DHL, I sent to the President of the Americas. Nothing.
Nice.
So we got to figure out who might respond other than the Office of the President of the Americas.
Right.
You know, just sort of a wacky thought, but Ben and Safe and Rodrigo and I have been talking about other kinds of activities for volunteers. I'm just going to say this because it's not an idea to do anything about, but I could imagine that if we had our act together someday, we networked our enablers so that they did sort of relays of devices from country to country to country and had a chance to meet with each other. Just sort of some alternative grassroots transport network.
It is. There's always oceans in the way at some point.
You don't think enablers can swim?
With a device in their mouth? Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe your
All right.
dog can and mine.
All right. As I said, it was just a thought. Sometimes you have a thought, you have to express it.
You could do it within Europe, certainly, and possibly within Asia, but clearly from North America.
Well, maybe to add to that idea, the job that I had, which again was sort of one organization and not this whole network, but it had 6 sites, and anytime anybody would go from one site to the next, they basically would send a message saying, what needs to go where, and then a package would be organized, and usually there was at least a couple things that needed to go somewhere. I think it is a potential to think about some sort of checklist when people are traveling from one place to the next, if there's things that need to be brought around, but that really takes a lot of coordination, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're,
And that was an era when people actually did a lot of travel, but it's good to have in mind. Let's revisit this in about 8 months.
Sounds good. All right, next up was my action item to create a Google form for a simplified way of requesting devices. I did draft a form. I haven't done anything with it yet because I wanted to look at it together.
Enter the dog.
Hey, there he is.
Come here.
So we will look at that in just a moment. And then I also incorporated John's policy statements that we looked at last week into our code of conduct. So we will go through that together as well. So let's take a look at those two here. Let me share my screen.
It's okay.
Okay, are you guys seeing this? Okay. All right, so here's the form I created. It's I tried to keep it simple, but we do need some basic information. So I figure if somebody wants a device, they can fill out this form. It's their email address, their full name, their phone number, which is the phone number is the only optional field in here, but it would be nice to have. The location, general, like country and region. The first name of the person needing a device. We don't necessarily need their full name, just, this is for, Sarah or whatever. The type of device they need, hand, arm, finger, other, right or left, or both. And are you working with a medical professional? That's it. So I tried to keep it simple, just give us what we need to kind of understand what we're dealing with. The idea is that if somebody fills out this form, you know how it works, it goes into a Google Sheet, but I can also set it up so that it will email us every time the form is filled out, so that one of us or our group address maybe at our help desk would receive a notice that so-and-so, has requested this device. And we would then reach out to them. I guess my thinking was that our next step would be an email to that person with much more detailed instructions about how to get into Enable Web Central, step-by-step guidance for creating their device requests based on the information they gave us, et cetera. But there's a number of other possibilities here. There's the possibility of actually setting up the device request in e-NABLE Web Central for them. I mean, we have the information here. So there is the possibility that, Bob, you go in and you actually create that device request and create the case, and then reply back to them saying, hey, I set up your case number is such and such, here's where you can find it. The only trick with doing that is I don't think we have a way of creating an EWC account on behalf of the person. So Bob, if you created the case for them, that case is going to be then under your name. We want it under their name. So there's some logistics to figure out there. I don't know exactly how that would work.
And also, it seems to me, Jeremy, this is a great improvement, but the roadblock always is the uploading of photos.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I
I
mean,
hadn't thought about that here.
You know,
So,
if you get somebody to even create a case, it dies frequently on the uploading of photos.
yeah, it's true.
So I wonder if that's actually a really good opportunity for a video conference where the concierge or Bob talks to them, meets them, assesses them, and then if appropriate says, let me see the arm, hold it this way, hold it that way. And we use that to get the photos from the, to take video from which we can extract photos.
Interesting. I don't know that you'd be able to get the kind of quality that you need doing that through a remote session like that. It's possible.
We send out a T-shirt that has a 1 inch by 1 inch grid on it in advance of the YouTube video.
There you go.
You know, if one person does this, it's fine. If we get 5 requests, it's going to overwhelm me or anybody else.
Well, and the last time we did this is going back a long way, but before we had e-NABLE Web Central, when we had somebody doing matching, we had a form like this and we had a lot of people filling it out. So there is that possibility. At one point in time, we had, I think, well over 1,000 people that had filled out our form.
It's a very different era.
It is. So I don't think we're gonna have that many, but I definitely think there could be more than a few.
Well, at some point, personal responsibility of the recipient has to kick in here and they have to cooperate, right?
It's true.
Only so much pulling and dragging we can do.
Well, look, this is clearly the right next step.
Yeah.
And as we've just said, there are many steps after this that could follow, but let's see what happens.
Well, yeah, what we want to do is trial it anyway and see what kind of response we get and what kind of, I mean, I'm happy to intervene and try to do something with that person. It's just interesting that when somebody requests a device, I point them, I've created a separate template on the help desk that explains in more detail how to make an EWC case. And then I say, we do have a concierge available if you're located in North America. Would you be interested in that? And you don't get any response, you don't get an EWC case. So.
Right. I think it's analogous. I sign up for free trials all the time because they're, especially if they don't require a credit card, they're free. Maybe I'll learn something. It takes only 30 seconds.
Right.
If it takes 5 minutes or a prolonged relationship, I bail. And I think that's what goes on with a lot of them.
Could be.
I wonder how much the approach might impact it too. Not saying that the way that we're doing it isn't a good process, but concierge. I don't know if they are coming from other countries. That might even be a question mark. They might not fully understand what processes.
A lot of them are, Ben. That's been the problem for the last several months. Any requests I get are from India or Asia or whatever, Africa.
Right.
That's been the problem to some extent. But let's go ahead and see what happens.
That's right.
So you want me to put it out there and invite people to use it and just set it up to send the emails to the help desk, Bob?
Yeah, we got that mechanism. Let's at least pilot it that way. Does that make sense?
All right, let me give it a try. Yeah, like you said, we'll pilot it, see where it goes, and we can always drop it if it's not helpful.
We can always adjust it on the
Okay.
fly here, but let's at least get something going.
Okay, I'll get that set up then. So I'll let you know when it's in place, and you'll see those emails come into the help desk, and we'll figure out how to follow up. We can create a new template for those responses, etc. So. Okay, and then the other action item here was to incorporate John's policy statements into the code of conduct. So if we jump over here to the code of conduct here, this is what was there already. So we had kind of general guiding principles, which I left as is. Community is open to everyone. Code of, volunteer engages in behavior that violates this code of conduct. We may take action that we deem appropriate. Let's see, as a non-commercial, so this is a part, these 3 parts here I added in from John's document. So talking about the fact that we, people who knowingly abuse these policies may be called out in public. We expect that providers of enabled designs should acknowledge e-NABLE and honor all relevant licenses. And then this last piece I put in here, we talked about avoiding the whole talk about charging, but I did include this. I said, as a general rule, e-NABLE does not charge money for the services or devices offered. Most e-NABLE design licenses include a non-commercial clause preventing the use of design for commercial purposes. And I just left it at that. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying, generally speaking, we don't, and you got to be careful about the licenses. Does that seem like an okay statement to include?
It does, but is most accurate, or should the word be many?
I think it's most. I mean, every license I've ever pulled up has had a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution license.
All right then.
Okay, and then the rest of it is what was there before. We've got guidance for e-NABLE volunteers. We already had in here the part about volunteers should always have recipients sign a release and waiver. That was something John brought up, but that was already in here. We talk about photo video releases, all the other stuff that was already in here. So I incorporate most of what I added in was just these few points up here. I think it helps to kind of, set the stage. Any other thoughts on this? Are we okay with this? Any other changes we should make?
Looks good to me. I do have a peripheral comment that this has just triggered. Blender, using the Peter Binkley method.
Yep.
The overlay models that are in there are virtually all obsolete with the exception of the Phoenix V2.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I've used it a couple times, and thankfully I usually do use a Phoenix V2, but the rest of them are useless. I think somebody has to upload the proper scaled models of all the new devices and eliminate the other ones. Plus, there are models in there that I've never heard of. So they must have been very early models.
Yeah, and if we try to do it the same way, if we try to put those all into a Blender file and have all of the various models that are currently available in there, that's going to be a huge file. It's already a big file.
I think Blender is not awfully usable these days for most.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about actually doing a new video tutorial showing a similar sizing methodology, but using Fusion 360.
Yeah, something needs to replace it or fix it.
Okay. That's a good point. I'm not sure I can do anything about it right now, but we got to think about how to address that.
You're beyond my skill level.
Yeah.
Jeremy, that's very interesting, but Fusion is pretty daunting for the newcomer. I'm wondering for sizing whether Thingiverse might be the common denominator. I'm not Thingiverse, Tinkercad.
Well, I don't know. Does Tinkercad allow you to load images and assign those images to specific planes? And then
I beg your pardon. Well, I don't.
And then you got to be able to.
I'll look into that. You got me there, but
you got to be able to scale.
I'll look into that.
I think
you have to be able to scale the images too.
The important thing maybe to put in the notes is that Blender is no longer a really usable sizing method because of that. So we have to come up with something.
Yeah.
Well, Blender hasn't gotten any worse, right?
Well, no, it's just, it doesn't have our current models in there. It doesn't have.
Well, okay. So just, we could check with Peter, but I would imagine that if we said we will gather all of the current models we think should be in it, would you do another version? He would be happy to do that.
I don't know what's involved in actually putting one of those little scale models into Blender. Is it?
I don't
No,
either, but the point is
It's
he
just an
does.
STL file. You just import it. It's not hard at all. The trick is that those are STL files of fully assembled hands. So it's not just a matter of taking the hand model and dumping it in. Somebody has to create a model that has all the components in their assembled sort of organization. And that assembled model is what gets pulled into Blender. So I don't know that we have assembled. I have one for the Phoenix, I know, but he's already got that in there. I don't know that we have a fully assembled model for the kinetic hand, for the NIOP, for these other designs that we have now. So that might be something that the designers need to help with. Anyway, good point. We're gonna have to look into that and try to get that updated.
Well, and it could be something too to follow up with folks like Matt Botel and others. I mean, he's definitely able to do that too, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, Matt has given several sizing approaches, which is helpful too. So you can do the sort of the Peter Binkley method that we've been talking about, but he also gives you the ability to do sizing from a photo just by taking measurements in various directions and then, referencing a chart and things like that. So he gives you other ways to work around that.
Great.
There are probably, I would guess, 5 or 6 models we'd have to put in, right?
Yeah, probably.
Well, you got the Phoenix V2, you got the Unlimited.
Well, you could probably, actually, now that I think of it, you could probably drop some of the ones that are in there. I think he's got like the K1 hand in there. You could get rid of that, and make room for some of the new
And then
designs.
there's some, like I said, there must be early models that went nowhere because.
Right. We could probably drop the Raptor hand out of there. So yeah, if we get rid of the older designs and bring in the new ones, it might not increase the file size too much.
Well, is Peter available to have a discussion with?
I don't know how much availability he has these days, but I'm happy to reach out to him and find out.
Why don't we at least send him an email and say, look, here's the problem.
He's busy right now, but I will mention that it occurs to me that Masvi's colorizer could be the foundation for him adding scaling functionality to this, because I think it's populated by 3D models, right?
Well, I don't know that we want to try to work scaling into that, but you bring up a good point that he might have the 3D models that we need of the fully assembled hands to bring into the Blender file. So that might be a good person to go to get those models. Yeah, okay. I guess let me ask him too. So ask Masvi if we can get models of fully assembled hands. Okay, so I'll reach out to them and see what we can do, but it's a good point, Bob. So let's move on. We got our metrics on the second, third, and fourth pages as usual. Those have been updated. Nothing really to call out there.
We have one new chapter.
One new chapter. Otherwise, kind of steady growth. Nothing really to call out there. Moving on to our agenda, there's a copy of the policy stuff that John had drafted. I left that in here. I'll take that out for next week. So I was referencing that. No active Lumio discussions or proposals right now. It is dead there right now. So not quite sure what to do with that. Nobody's using our Lumio platform.
Yeah, I want to raise it though. I sent out the email to participants here. We've got $30,000 unallocated in the e-NABLE fund now.
Yep.
I'm acutely aware that 10 months from now, somebody's going to have to write a report to Dodora, John. Yep. So
yeah, so I think it may be a good moment for SPC to think about drafting a proposal. We can talk about what it should entail, but we could easily draft a proposal that we believe in that allocates enough money for Bob to not feel nervous and gives us the discretion we have wanted when we wanted it. It might be a way of giving Ben a longer horizon. We might even think about paying people to do certain things. Like, I keep arguing with Ben about this, my pet notion that someone should systematically cull Facebook social media posts in order to come up with a low-end estimate, a low-end census of all known deliveries. So
You know,
those are just examples of
I
things
like
that
I like the idea of an SPC proposal from time to time, especially when we have additional funds available. I also like the idea of the SPC collectively proposing Ben's renewal. I actually like that more than Ben proposing it himself. It just makes more sense to me that we collectively say we want Ben's work to continue. Here's what we're proposing, as opposed to Ben kind of putting his hand up saying, "Hey, I'd like more money, please." I kind of like the idea of that coming
It's
from
more
us.
fair to Ben.
Yeah.
But I also want to point out that we have to remember what we sort of portrayed to Dora. And the reason I'm focusing on that is there's $20,000 more sitting there,
Mhm.
depending on what we write and do. So we ought to put a little thought into, okay, what did we present to Dora as a good use? And what hits me is we wanted a 3-year commitment because our projects are longer term and are staged. So a one-shot deal doesn't support our initial approach to them. That's
Well,
all.
we've talked about some initiatives that might be a good fit for this. We've talked about these kits, these handbags that we might send out to prospective organizations, either partners or potential donors, or schools that want to get involved in e-NABLE, things like that. So there's a number of possibilities there, but there's a lot that goes into that. You know, getting those kits organized, getting the devices put together for them, you know, the shipping, so that could be the kind of thing that we kind of work into a program that gets funded by some of this. And that would be a nice story to tell, that we were able to implement this new program for outreach, and what we were able to do with that. That's one possibility.
Like, that tells me that we need to decide and get something going within, say, 1 to 2 months from now. And that gives us 6 to 8 months of activity to report. I'm just trying to set up the next.
I think it's
Yeah,
great, Bob.
absolutely.
Exactly
So-
the right attitude.
So maybe as an appetizer, it's not something that I can fully report on, but I met with Nate and the NIAP team yesterday. They do this Thursday meeting, and he's come up with a document that summarizes the phase 3 and prepares for the phase 4. So he's getting geared up for making a Lumio proposal for that, I know.
Who is that?
Nate.
Nate,
Oh, okay.
NIAP stuff. I think the conversation that we had, inspired by the BMask activity recently, which I thought also was, I think we're onto something with that. I shared that the model that we had talked about with the BMask of having sort of like an open forum be a potential output of his efforts, instead of him trying to be the expert of sort of the full NIAP system and trying to bring everybody into the NIAP stuff. I thought I'd share the model of saying, maybe it would be worth to have some kind of a, doesn't have to be a conference, but a contest or something, and have that be a focus for his team and try to bring more people into it. And he thought that was a really great idea, and thought that would probably be an additional Lumio proposal.
I want to be constructive. I think Nate has to understand phase 1 isn't finished.
I'll leave that to you, Bob.
You need to say why phase 1 isn't finished.
The devices have been created. They are not deployed. They are not fully workable. There's much development to be done. To go on to phase 2, 3, and 4, I think is the wrong approach.
Well, there's there's an important issue there, but there's also a minor nomenclatural issue. Nate is already in phase 3 in the sense that he's done, I think, 3 proposals and met the nominal benchmarks for those proposals. So that's just nomenclature. The deeper issue, you're right, is that while I don't regret the investment to date, we don't want to perpetuate a pattern of advancing a complicated system that is not being deployed.
Agreed.
Right. I
But-
wonder if some sort of a evaluation process could be considered for not just Nate, but this whole process. Right now, for example, when I got to the finish line of the media coordination first part of it, I put together some sort of a report. But I wonder if that could be sort of an open form as well, where there could be sort of evaluation that could be submitted as part of the process. You know, from the community, you know, whether it's Bob or whether it's
Right.
the SPC or whether it's just somebody that says, you know, I was expecting this and I haven't seen it or whatever.
Well, we've got the feedback forms out there, but I think getting honest feedback from people is always challenging. I think the core issue here is the lack of an effective terminal device on the NIOP system, which
Well, now, that I think is something that we could target and address. And by the way, not necessarily involving Nate. My impression is that the new kinetic hand would be a perfect terminal device. And I don't think I don't see why it would be complicated to adapt that to the QC wrist.
Just to interject,
QC connector.
there are other issues. You know, the shoulder harness has issues. The shell bow has issues. It's heavy. It doesn't function quite as well as intended. I'm not diminishing the terminal device. That's number one. But there are other aspects that are, excuse me, dog is coming up. There are other aspects that need to be addressed than just a terminal device. To fill it out.
Well, and I wonder if some of that could be addressed with a sort of some kind of a feedback stage of our process. And in terms of the terminal device, there is some hand. I know nothing about it, but there is some hand that has been sort of incorporated into his catalog. He shared it at Pointer. It's a new design. It is pretty funny to watch this dog either whipping Bob with his tail.
he's
Or-
climbing Mount Bob.
I'm sorry, it's called Bob, but now she'll lick my face and, you know, go ahead.
All right, I've gotten used to multitasking with dogs, so I'm going to speak for myself. I think Ben has opened up the possibility that the SPC proposal notion opens up the possibility that we could work to create a mechanism that would not be a grant to Nate, but might actually be something that could end up supporting Nate and his laudable, if incomplete, efforts. For example, what if there was just brainstorming here, a bounty on which goes to there's a first prize and a second prize to people who demonstrate a terminal device that fits with the NIOP system, having been evaluated by one or two recipients. Just an example that we could create a mechanism that would offer a real, even monetary reward for a package of development and execution. And I wouldn't be surprised if Nate realized that he could win that prize, and then it would restructure his focus.
And he seems open to this idea of having a forum or a contest or some sort of show and tell outside of NIOP with some specific objectives in mind. That's what we talked about, and he seemed really geared up on it.
And I like the idea, and I think in some ways it puts us in the position not just of complaining about the fact that superhuman Nate can't do everything, but it allows us to assume our rightful responsibility and ownership of the project.
I think the idea has merit. I want to interject though too, as a general policy, with just NIOP being an example, not for NIOP, how, in a world of limited funds and a lot of opportunity, how much money do we put into any given specific project?
Well, it's a good question.
Your
I
judgment
think,
call. I think we got to start somewhere though. I like the idea of SPC sponsored projects written up in Lumio. And I think the best way to test this out is let's do one. And to me, the most obvious choice to start with is Ben's renewal. It's timely. It's very appropriate for us to put forward. It's the kind of thing that we could fund for, you know, another full year. And it's something that we already know works. It shows results. It just seems like a good fit for me. Let's write a proposal for Ben's, you know, next year, and it'll quickly get voted up. We'll use that as our kind of test run for an SPC sponsored proposal, and we could talk about what to put up next. But that would be a good one.
Ben, are you comfortable with that?
You know, I am comfortable with, you know, continuing to collaborate and work with you guys. I would want to, before putting up any kind of a proposal, figure out how this can be sort of shifted towards scalable models. So I think we've gotten closer to making some of the things that I'm doing more easy to replicate, but we haven't gotten there yet. I mean, and I'm recognizing this as some limitations in terms of what I've been able to accomplish in getting other people to follow along and contribute to some of this stuff. So I think that would really want to be a part of it, whether we get student interns that are involved. I think we're starting to get some momentum with this new member orientation. We've got one guy working with us with Wishbone. Nate's got 2 folks from the meetings just from this last month that are really proven to be wonderful assets for him. Let's try to figure out a sustainable model. And I'm happy to, you know, can sit down with you guys and
Okay,
show you.
I think it should be a collaborative effort. I think, Ben, you should be very much involved in defining this proposal and the program and how that gets written up. When we ultimately post it to Lumio, I'm just saying we post it as SPC, saying this is what we're proposing, but I think you should actually be primary in helping us to formulate that proposal.
I think
Okay,
that's
great.
great, but I can underline that what's going on with Ben is he tends not to be comfortable with him being the keystone of this. Everyone else on this call is actually comfortable and pleased with him being the keystone, but he may move on. He may go to graduate school, he may do other things. And besides, in principle, speaking for Ben, he thinks that we should be building a system which is less dependent on any one individual. And when I put it that way, I think we can all agree. So I think that's the way we should think about it, is
I don't
to
disagree with that being the goal, but we got to be realistic. We've never really been very successful with that. Meanwhile, we have found an individual who has proven himself to be very capable at doing these things.
right. As long as this individual is available, I think we're good.
Right.
But this individual makes the point that he is not willing to marry himself to us long term.
Yeah.
And we therefore should do this in such a way that if Ben were to move on, we would have created a well-defined niche for another director of communications or whatever it was. And
Well,
I
that
think,
actually gives us
correct me
a
if I'm
good
wrong, Ben,
framework.
but that would
That gives
honor
us a good-
your,
Yeah, that gives us a good framework for writing up this proposal, because if we, instead of just doing another proposal of, hey, we just want to renew Ben's work and do another round, let's write it up as the whole goal of this next phase is to have Ben continue doing what he's been doing while building out the templates and infrastructure and automation and everything else to keep this going beyond him. And if that becomes kind of the focus of the proposal, where that is built in as a primary goal, maybe we can achieve both.
Sounds good. And I've got this document. I think I've shared it with John in the past. I can share my screen right now if we have the time, or
Yeah, we got time.
I can share my screen.
Well, Ben's, just to throw into the equation, I think it would be good to report to Dora that we're doing something that takes several years
That's right.
and will result in more people receiving devices and help,
Absolutely.
utilizing this art and technology.
So this is the media coordination sponsorship document in terms of brainstorming this stuff up. A paragraph that summarizes the size and impact, scope and value, and distributed and decentralized networking of the community. Here's the ask. I brought this up because this is sort of the model that I think we've settled into over this past year. So quarterly newsletters, social media engagement, and again, going between, the hub to Facebook, like John was talking about, articles in Enabling the Future, presentations, chapter spotlight series is something I'd really like to continue and build upon. Mentoring and training, we're just starting with community infrastructure, which could include some of this automation that we've done in the hub. And then internationalization, I think we've just touched on it, but Everton was a wonderful model for that in Cointer. I would be interested to continue. Well, let me put it this way. I'm a little bit hesitant in the Lumio process in that I do think having this role come out of the same pot of funds as all the other projects could be sort of troublesome in the future. And I'd love to be able to, with this sort of more polished model that I think, I can glue together, I think we might be able to get funds specifically for this part-time role that could, in the form of a scholarship or a grant, continue every year, be something that could bring students in or other volunteers, but I think students would be ideal. Maybe in 6 month or 1 year contract, 6 months is probably fine, or even a semester. If we have enough modeling materials, and if we get some funds from somebody maybe like Red Hat or IBM or Google or Verizon or some communications based technology company, I think it wouldn't be in competition with other projects, which I think would be in the long shot ideal. That's my I don't know, long vision, I guess, of what would be the best.
Well, I just like to say, Ben, that when we initially created the Enable Fund, the vision for that was always providing a funding mechanism that would be geared towards helping the overall global community, not so much about helping this individual or that chapter, but funding projects that are going to benefit the community overall. In that respect, I think the work that you've done and continue to do is a perfect fit for that. Everything that you're doing is helping the community to become more solid, more established, better connected, helping us to grow. It's very much in line with that. So I really would encourage you not to, feel like you're taking funds away from something else. It's just, I think it's very relevant work. The other thing I would say is that there's a couple of mechanisms of doing this. You talked about getting some kind of sponsorship specifically for this role. That would be great. Another possibility is we've talked about the fact that maybe the SPC should hold back some pool of funds to say, look, the community has certain things that it needs. And so we're going to sort of retain ownership of X dollars per year to just say, these are things that we need to get done and keep those outside of the voting pool. This could also fall into that kind of a bucket as well, where we have this discretionary SPC fund. Just there's some things that are just, don't necessarily need to go through voting. We need to pay for hosting. We need to pay for, some of our online tools that we use. There's certain costs that we know need to be funded to keep things going. There's no reason to put those out to a vote every time. This could easily fall into that category too, where we as an SPC simply say, we're allocating X thousands, from our discretionary fund to keep this program going for another year or what have you.
Right, that makes sense. And as a model, as a grant, as a scholarship, I think it's sort of in its structuring or DNA has this idea of being sort of community based. So, I just noticed that, for the long term, I think it will make a difference, how we sort of set up this section. Maybe we just aim for extending things for 6 months,
Yeah.
hoping that with this document sent out and over the next couple months, maybe we can bring in some long-term funds to support sort of infrastructure. And I do think that, again, saying support e-NABLE, contribute to the e-NABLE fund, we, 3D print hands and now do PPE,
Right.
is different than what this is. This is a very clear package. This is communications, and we have examples of all of it. So we can say, here's a
Well,
portfolio, and
and
this
if
is
you're-
something that is an educational opportunity. We have plenty of folks coming through the door, and I think it really would be motivating to have some, not permanent positions, but permanent scholarships.
Niches.
Well, that's
Yeah.
the trick. I think it's a great idea. In practice, the trick is turnover, right? You have somebody
Yeah.
that comes in and says, "Oh yeah, I'll do that," and then they kind of lose interest after a couple months, and it's very hard to kind of keep retraining and that sort of thing. But if you find the right individual, I'd say you had the right idea with maybe taking these one at a time. Maybe have somebody that starts to take on the newsletter and have somebody else that takes on articles for ETF or what have you, and start to split them out. It's all about the people, though. Part of the reason that this is working so well right now, Ben, is because you're behind it. Quite honestly, it's the person doing the work. You're not just a doer. You're a leader. You're a guy who's able to kind of see what's needed and take charge and build things.
Right.
Finding people with those kinds of skill sets is quite difficult.
Right, and who's going to manage a student coming in doing something?
Well,
I think ideally, we're actually, if I do this project right, which I think we're getting closer to, we don't need a leader because the model will be there to lead. So, somebody can look at a chapter spotlight, they can look at 5 chapter spotlights and say, okay, there's 9 sections, and I just have to interview and fill in these points. And I have to do, let's say 1 quarter. And the same with the newsletter. I think we've established it over the last year that, okay, here's a format that works. And it's a lot easier for me to do them now than it was the first time. I appreciate that, that you guys are recognizing sort of the learning curve that's been involved. And but I think the SPC is a wonderful vehicle for managing that. So if there's a student that once a week joined the SPC and said, this is what I've been working on, and you guys had the whole model recipe, and you could say, well, you know what?
I think that's a good way to write it up. I mean, you've got a good list here. And by the way, Ben, I would say let's take this list that you have here that you have highlighted. Let's get that incorporated into our volunteering needs page on the hub, because I don't think we have a lot of this stuff represented there right now. So let's put this out there that, hey, these are things we're looking for. And then let's write up this proposal like we talked about, but let's focus it on this, the fact that we're going to be bringing in interns and we're going to be focusing on enabling, this program beyond Ben. And let's make that our goal instead of just continuing to run the program. Let's make this next phase all about, building an ongoing infrastructure.
That'd be great. And I'd be happy to contribute to that, in terms of the mentoring, in terms of the
that'll
the
be
whole
very much
process.
needed.
right. So I want to underline a few technical points. One is, if the money is in the e-NABLE fund, it does need to be voted on. I think that's
Correct.
sort of constitutionally required and a good thing.
Correct.
However, this proposal to be voted on by the e-NABLE fund can say the point of this proposal is to try to prototype and then try to create a separate capacity fund for sort of organizational activities.
Well, I think these are 2 different proposals, actually. I would say that the first proposal we do is simply to fund this program, the communications program, talk about everything that we've discussed here and how it's about building, the long-term solution for this. That's just something that we propose as having it funded. Next, we could do another proposal to say, we'd like to, move this model forward. We propose having a separate bucket of funds that the SPC can manage and allocate on discretionary basis. I think that could be its own proposal, getting buy-in for us having kind of a separate set of funds, separate from the e-NABLE fund. I would see that as a second proposal, though, separate from this.
Well, I'm okay with that. I suspect that that makes it less palatable to Ben, but he can speak for himself. We'll hash this through as we work on the first proposal.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not opposed to sort of tying some of this stuff together, but I do think, maybe by the time we get around to this next round, we can set it up as, IBM will match the contribution, or Red Hat, or something like that. I think maybe by then we'll have some dialogue with one of these companies, and they'll say, I think if we talk to the right person, it's a no-brainer to align an initiative like this, that's a student scholarship, especially if we can be also contributing in that direction. So
I just want to be sure that when we put this proposal out there, it needs to be clear what people are voting on. And I feel if our proposal is talking about this whole program for communications, and oh, by the way, we're also talking about how we want to manage funds through the SPC moving forward, it's kind of like two different big things that you're voting on in one proposal. That seems like it might be confusing to me.
and we might be able to step over the whole thing with some sort of corporate matching. So we might be able to, instead of creating this whole separate thing, we can say, look, we've talked to Verizon. Verizon has up to, I don't know, $10,000 to put into this. We can match that $10,000, and then we have $20,000 for this every year. What do you think, community? And then it's, I think, a little bit more attractive than just coming out of the
a simple way of splitting the difference on this is to add a bullet to the programs that you've listed, which is to expand our corporate outreach program as part of your responsibility. That doesn't make any commitments about how the corporate partnership will take shape, but it telegraphs that you are going to be seeking extra funds, both because you're comfortable with that model and because we want them. And yet it does not complicate what people are voting on. It just says this is one of the many important things Ben does and is going to be doing more of.
Sounds good.
Okay, good.
I'm also, it just occurred to me that this might help. I'm adding in, and I'll finish typing it up later. I'm adding into our, we have a pinned post at the top of the e-NABLE forum. I'm adding a note into that pinned post about the fact that there is funding available. Please go submit your Lumio proposal, so that it's right there in the forum. I think that might be helpful. We could even put a balance in there if we wanted to say, hey, there's currently, $30K available in the fund. Go propose something or whatever.
Well, that's right. Actually, in that context, there's a news item, right? That this grant that came in unexpectedly of $5,000 from NetCetera this week means that we are even better than we were. We're even richer than we were last week. It is time for people to really think about how best to use the money that we have brought together.
I'll share that post. They shared it publicly with their community yesterday. I haven't gotten a link to their post, but they said it would be the 17th. So I'll share our news today. And we did get through Bob and their team an edit back of what they'd like us to say.
And by the way, the NetCetera money has hit our bank account, as Bob prompted me to check last night.
Great.
Very good. Not much time left here. What do you guys want to talk about? You have anything else?
I could give a really quick nod to this Wishbone effort. I think it's been a little bit 2 steps forward, 1 step back, trying to figure out the structuring, but we did have, I think, a really productive meeting this week. We brought in Evan, I'm going to say his name wrong, Blackman, I think, who was one of the new members last month in the orientation meeting. He just graduated from school studying accounting. He seems, I think, really motivated to help us with this.
A job for him, accounting. John.
Well, that's right. We plugged him into Well, we plugged them into the setting up the structure for the Wishbone project. Your point is that, well, okay, we'll have it in mind. Right now, this is a good fit for him, and he may not be available as much when he begins graduate school in January. So we've got a really good focused thing for him right now, but I take your point, Bob.
So it is an example of this orientation program, which is developing. We also had a meeting with Saif and Ricardo about planning for the next version of that. I'm waiting to hear back from Everton to see if he can be a guest chapter leader. But I think we're in good shape for extending those sessions into these little micro task challenges, and how that can not just motivate those monthly meetings, but also ripple into the community and start, we sort of have this whole process. I can share an email about it later, which is, I think, exciting. The Wishbone stuff, Terry's going to be looking into how to tie in the whole thing with local media. John's looking into previous posts that are in this domain. For example, this guy from India who's been asking for some support. I'll be coming up with the form, a sketch of the form of what people will fill out for a request or a donation, and Evan's working on sort of the structural side of how the accounts will be working together, and even the nonprofit status. As an unregistered nonprofit, there's some threshold that we can work underneath and not have to incorporate or anything like that, which is interesting. So, I think it's all, I just wanted to give you guys an update on that, that's actually two things, the orientation and this Wishbone, that are sort of cross-pollinating, I think, in a good way. So.
Okay.
Great.
I think that's probably a good point to wrap. We're at the top of the hour here. So let's regroup next week. We can continue this. Just looking to see if I captured some new action items up at the top, but I think we've covered all that. Yeah, so let's continue the discussion next. I'm just sitting here thinking, do we need to do anything in terms of the proposal that we were discussing between now and next session? John, are you and Ben in a position to start kind of talking about how to formulate that?
Sure.
And then maybe we can start working on that after next week.
Right. I think a high level document for the proposal would be a good place to start, not leaping directly into what Ben has already done, but just to enumerate what I think are the key points.
Yeah, and I think it should be more focused on the goals we've discussed moving forward.
That's right. That's right.
Previously.
I assume, by the way, that any future donations, we talk about these corporate matching and everything else, it's going to have to go through the e-NABLE fund, because those entities need a charitable source for their tax deduction.
Well, but that's not true, Bob. They will almost certainly go through Rochester e-NABLE Limited, but that doesn't necessarily mean the e-NABLE fund. I take the e-NABLE fund.
I don't see that as an issue, though. Even if it goes into the e-NABLE fund, when we talk about the SPC having some discretionary authority over spending, to me, that doesn't mean that money can't be in the e-NABLE fund. I don't see anything wrong with saying that, we reserve the right to control, 50% of the funds in the e-NABLE fund at any given time, or something like that, whatever the number is. If the money's sitting there, I mean, our problem is we don't have anybody writing up proposals anyway. They're not using it. Let's put it to good use.
Well, okay, but to be clear, I don't think you can reserve the right. I think you can write a proposal which the community can then give you the right to reserve 50%.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. It would be a proposal.
Okay.
I'm just saying, let's propose some amount of the e-NABLE fund that the SPC moving forward would have the ability to just allocate as needed. And I think it would get upvoted. I think people would see the reason in that.
John, just a point of clarification. A company donates specifically to the e-NABLE fund, right? That's the 501(c)(3) entity?
No, the 501(c)(3) entity is entitled Rochester e-NABLE Limited. The people who write the checks know that. That's what they write the check to.
The e-NABLE fund is just the mechanism that we use to manage that.
It's
It
the
allows it to
program,
be
if you will.
transparent on Open Collective.
Got it. Got it.
There is one thing, this is a little bit of a tangent, but on the education initiative, John and I did spend some time on Airtable. We were trying to get a form together. Although John has credits for the pro account for Airtable, there is some extension that's required to try to have a couple tables feeding into one form. It costs $40 a month. I sort of X'd it out as thinking, $500 a year is an awful lot for a silly extension. But that's something to think about. We do know that Airtable has the capacity to be embedded into the hub. It's got a really attractive looking sort of like album view of these different submissions.
What are we talking about here, Ben? What would this be for? Is this to enable the?
This is the
It's a technical point, but it's needed for there to be a natural flow when people are creating a new educational resource
right,
within the framework of Airtable. And Ben, you're right. If
What are we talking about in the context of e-NABLE here? What is the Airtable being used for?
So if I take a step back, if I take a step back to the collaborations with Lindsay, we basically looked at this curriculum together and then got the sense that really it's not about coming up with a curriculum, but it's about modeling an archive of educational resources. And actually this week there's been people that continue to go back to some of the educational sources that were posted in the hub and comment on them and say how wonderful they are. I think that's a huge potential asset, right? And we've got so many members that are connected to education. So I do continue to every week think about how can we build this into our toolkit. So John and I did find this Airtable.
Ben, here's what Jeremy wants to know.
Yeah, I'm just
Jeremy,
trying to understand we're talking about investing $40 a month in order to provide a mechanism that's going to make it easier for people to find educational resources
and to create educational resources.
Okay, so this is kind of about mapping and tying all these resources together. And okay, I mean, 'cause that's what I think that's what you need to look at ultimately is again, $500 a year might seem like a lot for a plugin, but ultimately it's about what is the value that it's bringing to us. And if we've never done a really great job of making these educational resources accessible and findable. And if it helped us do that, it would seem worthwhile to me. I mean,
Yeah, I agree with that. Ben, I thought you bailed because it was going to require $500 for each user. If that's something we can do and then it is available to everyone who uses the resource, it is a no-brainer. We can either write a proposal, we can either slide it into this proposal that we're doing. I'd even, Rogers e-NABLE Limited could just do it to avoid the voting process. It is a no-brainer.
I brought it up because I thought it is an example of some of these infrastructure things that we're talking about. So right now, to make a whole proposal for it, I think it makes more sense to say, for the future, having some SPC funds that can go in different directions will make it possible for something like that to just be pitched at a meeting like this and then saying, that's a good investment.
And I think those are the kind of things we can include as examples. When we write up that proposal, we can list out examples of things that we might use this for. And that'll make it, I think, very clear to people. Right. Yeah, I don't need to be voting on a plugin for $40 a month if you decide it's important.
And near term, Ben, however, you can say this is not something we want to do altogether, but if it's the case that it will function for everyone for that flat rate of $50 a month, I'll give you, or we'll sign up using the Rochester e-NABLE credit card. And when we eventually figure out how, I will seek reimbursement as Jeremy has done for money he's fronted for web development in the past.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
so
yeah,
we can go forward, Ben.
We can talk about that next week. And I did email the guy and sort of pulled on his heartstrings a bit and said, but we're a volunteer community and we'll use it for great things. And so he initially responded and said, no dice. And then I sent another email back. So we'll see where that goes.
Humbug?
Yeah, I guess,
right.
$40 for an extension. You're kidding me.
Tell him this is your colleague, the ghost from Christmas Future.
All All right, guys, see you next week.
Have a
Right,
good
see you
week,
guys.
everybody.
You
Bye.
too.
Happy holiday, Merry Christmas.
Oh, hey,
You
actually,
too.
no, Will, I see, so next Friday would be Christmas, the 25th. We
Yeah.
probably want to skip that, right?
I
And then the week
suppose.
after that, the Friday falls on New Year's.
New
So do we want to just take a break until January 8th here?
Change it to a different day too. I'm open. I
Well,
guess
certainly I'd rather not do it Christmas Day.
Yeah.
New Year's Day, I don't know, will John be sober enough?
Yeah, John will be at night. He'll be sober and not hungover, I might add. So yeah, for the moment, I'd say let's keep New Year's Day if everyone is willing, and if not, another day would be a good thing because I actually think we may have stuff we want to discuss.
Okay, I'll leave it
Before-
on there for New Year's Day for right now. We'll skip next week though. So happy
Okay.
holidays and see you guys in a couple weeks.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Yes.